Why was everyone whispering before she even spoke? The morning air at Westbrook Military Academy was sharp, the kind that bit into the lungs and made every breath look like smoke drifting from an unseen battlefield. Boots slammed in unison across the frozen ground, a chorus of discipline echoing between the gray barracks and the flagpoles snapping in the wind. Cadets stood in tight formation, eyes forward, shoulders squared. But as a single figure walked across the field, the rhythm of the morning seemed to falter. She wasn't what anyone expected. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Halt, gray sweatshirt, black training pants, hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid, walked with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. No medals, no rank displayed. Just calm, unreadable eyes and a faint scar curving along her neck, nearly invisible until the light caught it. Who's she supposed to be? Someone muttered. Some fitness coach, I think. Looks too soft for combat training. Sarah heard every word, but she didn't flinch. She'd been called worse by enemies who'd actually meant it. At the edge of the field, Colonel Whittaker adjusted his cap, his expression a stone mask of authority. "Cadets," he barked, voice carrying across the wind, "this is your new physical training instructor, Lieutenant Commander Halt." A ripple of confusion moved through the ranks. Lieutenant Commander, that rank didn't belong to an ordinary instructor. It belonged to veterans, people who'd been there, done it, seen too much of it. Yet the woman standing before them didn't look like the hardened soldiers they'd imagined. She looked still, too still. Sarah nodded slightly. "Thank you, Colonel." Then she faced them, mourning everyone. Her tone was light, almost too light for a field where failure had consequences. "Out here, we'll train 3 times a week. I don't care how fast you think you are or what you've done before. You'll prove it here." A few smirks. A muffled laugh. Sarah noticed. She smiled faintly, almost amused. "In my experience," she continued, "strength isn't in your arms, it's in your head. You'll learn to push when every bone tells you to stop. You'll learn to respect the person next to you, even when you think you're better. And when I'm done with you," her voice dropped, soft but edged with iron, "you'll know what real endurance means." Silence, just the sound of the flag snapping in the wind. The cadets didn't quite know what to make of her. She wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but there was something about the way she looked at them, something that made even the confident ones straighten unconsciously. 10 laps around the field," she said, "full gear." Groans rippled across the group. One voice, deep and cocky, rose just above the others. 10, she's got to be kidding." Sarah turned her head, eyes finding the source immediately. "Something to say, Cadet Danner." He blinked. "No, ma'am." "Good," she replied. "Make it 12. Laughter broke out, short-lived. When her gaze swept across them again, it cut the noise instantly. She didn't glare. She didn't need to. There was something colder, sharper in the silence that followed. The run began. Boots pounded mud, breath turned ragged. Sarah ran with them, steady, rhythmic, unbothered. No whistle, no shouting, just quiet steps, tireless, relentless. By the 7th lap, cadets began to fall behind. By the 10th, Danner's chest was heaving. By the 12th, Sarah finished exactly where she started, calm, barely winded. "What's wrong, cadet?" she asked when Danner staggered past her. "Thought you were faster than your instructor." He scowled, "Didn't realize we were competing." "We're not," she said, almost smiling. "I stopped competing years ago. Surviving became more interesting." He didn't understand, not yet. Later that day, the cadets huddled near the bleachers, laughing under their breath. "She talks tough, but she doesn't look like she's ever seen combat," one whispered. "Probably pushed papers for the Navy," another added. "You know how those desk officers are." Sarah passed by, clipboard in hand. She didn't react. The arrogance of youth didn't offend her anymore, it only disappointed her. That evening she stayed on the field alone. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and blood. The air smelled of wet soil and cut grass, but in her mind it was the dust of Afghanistan, the taste of sand and adrenaline. A memory rose like smoke. Gunfire screams. Her heartbeat pounding like a war drum. Move, halt. Someone had shouted it years ago, just before the explosion. She had moved, dragged a bleeding teammate out of the fire. The sand had been red for days after that. Now she stood on quiet ground, surrounded by cadets who didn't know what war felt like. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe that was why she was here, to teach them before the world did. Morning came again, gray and cold. The cadets lined up, stiff, anxious, trying not to look tired. Sarah walked the line, inspecting boots and uniforms. She stopped in front of Danner. "Your boots," she said simply. He looked down. The shine was dull, streaked with dirt. "Didn't have time this morning, ma'am." "Then you'll find time after 20 extra laps. Clean boots reflect discipline, not vanity." A faint muscle twitched in his jaw, but he said nothing. As she moved on, Peterson, another cadet, wiry and restless, muttered, "She's power tripping." Danner didn't answer. Something in her tone, calm yet absolute, lingered. It wasn't ego. It was authority earned somewhere harder than any classroom. "Circle up," she ordered. Tomorrow, she said, they'd begin combat movement training. No excuses, no complaints. The ground doesn't care who you are. It humbles everyone the same. "What do you mean, ma'am?" Danner asked. Sarah's eyes drifted toward the horizon. "You'll see soon enough." That night she sat in her small apartment near the academy. The medal on the table caught the light, a silver star, the only one she kept. She touched it briefly, thumb tracing its edges. A whisper escaped her lips. "You'd be surprised, cadet." The next day the sky was darker. Clouds hung low, heavy with rain. The air buzzed with tension before the first whistle blew. "Combat movement drills," Sarah announced. "Gear up." Weighted packs, training rifles, low barriers slick with mud. The field looked like a miniature battlefield stripped of glamour. She demonstrated first, dropping into a crawl so smooth, so precise, that the cadets fell silent. The way she rolled through mud, the exactness of her movements, it wasn't just training. It was instinct. "Expect to get dirty," she said, standing, mud streaking her face. "Expect to fail. Expect to learn." The whistle shrieked. The cadets dove forward. Mud splashed, curses flew. The drizzle turned to rain. Sarah moved among them, calm, observant, occasionally correcting a stance or posture with 2 quiet words. Halfway through, Danner faltered, slipping face first into the mud. His pride burned hotter than the strain in his arms. He looked up at her, expecting anger. "Don't slow down," she said quietly. "The ground doesn't care about excuses." He gritted his teeth, forcing himself forward. "You don't know what this is like," he snapped suddenly. "We've got limits." Sarah stopped. The rain hit harder. Every cadet froze. Her voice dropped, low, dangerous, intimate. "Limits are learned through pain, not complaints." The words hit harder than any yell could. Then she added, quieter still, "Try surviving without backup. Try carrying your teammate when he's bleeding out and you can't stop the bleeding. Then tell me about limits." Silent, the storm itself seemed to pause. Danner's breath came out shaky. He looked away. She stepped back, voice returning to its calm steadiness. "Resume the crawl." By the time they finished, the cadets were trembling, drenched, broken. Danner collapsed, gasping. "Why didn't you make it easier?" he asked. Sarah crouched beside him. "Because life won't, and I'd rather you learn that here, when the price is pride, not blood." No one laughed at her anymore, not even Peterson. That night, as the rain hammered against her apartment windows, Sarah sat in silence. Her sweatshirt still damp, her hair still dripping. She looked at her reflection in the window, strong, scarred, haunted. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Maybe they'll understand someday." But the memory came again, Kandahar, the alleyway, the shouting, the explosion. The dust, the ringing, the smell of burned metal. She saw Brooks, her teammate, reaching for her, whispering his last order, "Go lead them." She had, and she still was. The rain outside turned gentler, like a heartbeat slowing. Tomorrow would come, more mud, more pain. But that was the point. Every bruise on those cadets would mean something. Every mistake would carve discipline. And someday, when the truth came out, when they finally learned who she really was, those whispers of doubt would die for good. Sarah Holt, Navy SEAL combat veteran, had survived too much to care about mockery. Now she was teaching survival in a different war, one fought not with bullets, but with ignorance, arrogance, and pride. And that battle, she knew, had only just begun. What did she mean when she said they'd see soon enough? The question followed Danner into the next morning like an echo he couldn't silence. Westbrook Military Academy was gray and quiet, wrapped in the kind of fog that muted sound and made every breath feel heavy. The cadets stood in formation, still sore from the previous day's drills. Their uniforms were clean again, but their pride hadn't fully recovered. Sarah Holt stood at the edge of the field, clipboard tucked under her arm, her braid damp from mist. She watched them stretch, watched the way they tried to avoid her gaze. They were tense, guarded. Respect hadn't come yet, but silence had. That was a start. A faint smirk crossed her face. She remembered her own first instructors, voices that had cut through her arrogance like a blade. Now she was that voice. "Cadets," she called, her voice slicing through the fog like a rifle crack. "Today you'll learn combat movement, real groundwork. Expect to get dirty, expect to fail, expect to learn." Murmurs rippled through the line. Peterson leaned toward Danner. "Think she's trying to scare us again?" Danner didn't answer. He just watched her, jaw set. Something about her, her stillness, her tone, felt heavier than before. Sarah knelt in the mud, demonstrating how to crawl under the wire barriers. Her movements were smooth, practiced, too practiced for a mere trainer. When she rolled and shifted her weight, the cadets noticed the precision, the ease. It wasn't fitness. It was muscle memory, old, ingrained, professional. When she stood again, mud streaked her hands and face, but her posture was composed. "You're next," she said. The drill began. Rain started to fall, thin at first, then heavier. The mud thickened fast. Cadets pushed through it, some groaning, some cursing. Sarah walked the line, silent but watchful. When a cadet hesitated under the low wire, she crouched beside him. "Don't think," she said softly. "Move." The cadet blinked, nodded, and kept crawling. Halfway through the drill, Danner's endurance began to falter again. His chest burned, his arms shook. He tried to hide it, but Sarah noticed instantly. She didn't call him out, not yet. She let him fight himself first. By the final crawl, he snapped. "This is pointless," he shouted, slamming his hands into the mud. "You don't know what this feels like." Every head turned. Rain pounded harder. Sarah stopped. The field went silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. Her eyes locked on him, calm, unreadable, almost pitying. "You think this is hard?" she asked quietly. Danner hesitated, mud dripping from his chin. "Yes, ma'am, we're not machines." Sarah stepped closer, her voice lowering to something sharper. "Try crawling through mud while rounds crack over your head. Try pulling a man twice your size out of fire when your body's already broken. Then talk to me about hard." The words cut through him. The rest of the cadets stared wide-eyed. No one moved. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority in her tone wasn't trained. It was lived. She turned away and blew the whistle. "Resume." And they did. Not because they wanted to, but because something in her voice made disobedience impossible. By the time the drill ended, the field looked like a battlefield. Mud, sweat, and exhaustion covered everything. Danner dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Sarah crouched beside him again. "Still think it's pointless?" she asked. He shook his head. "Good," she said quietly. "Pain's not the enemy, quitting is." She stood and walked off, leaving him kneeling in the mud, rain washing streaks of filth from his face. For the first time, Danner didn't feel angry. He felt something worse, small. That night in the academy gym, Peterson found him sitting alone on a bench, staring at his boots. "She's intense," Peterson muttered, trying to lighten the mood. Danner didn't look up. "You ever notice how she moves?" "What do you mean?" "She doesn't flinch, doesn't guess. She knows what to do every second. That's not just training." Peterson frowned. "You think she's seen combat?" Danner exhaled. "I don't know, but she's not like any instructor we've had." Across the gym, Sarah was resetting the obstacle ropes, calm, methodical, alone. She moved like someone used to silence, someone who didn't need applause to know her worth. Later, when the gym emptied, she lingered. The rain outside tapped against the windows. She sat on the edge of the mat, unwrapping the band around her wrist. A faint scar ran beneath it, pale against her skin. A memory flashed, the roar of an explosion, the sting of shrapnel, the taste of iron. She closed her eyes and breathed. The memory passed. Her past was never gone. It just slept until noise woke it. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped. The field was a swamp, but Sarah didn't postpone drills. She called it real conditions. The cadets hated that phrase. Danner and Peterson lined up again, their faces drawn, uniforms already wet. The whistle blew. They ran, crawled, lifted, fell, got up again. When Peterson slipped for the third time, Sarah stopped beside him. "Your body's fighting the ground," she said. "You'll lose every time. Stop fighting it, flow with it." He didn't understand, but he tried anyway, and this time he didn't fall. Sarah nodded once. "Better." By noon, most cadets were near collapse. Danner's muscles screamed. The rain blurred his vision. He wanted to quit, but Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a pulse. "Do not stop," she shouted over the storm. "The ground won't wait for your weakness." He pushed harder. When it ended, he was trembling, breath ragged. She was barely winded. He looked up at her. "You actually like this, don't you?" Sarah met his eyes. "No," she said softly, "but I respect it." It was the first thing she'd said that sounded almost human to him. That night, Sarah sat at her desk, still in damp clothes. The metal on her table gleamed faintly in the lamp light. She turned it over in her hand. Her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. "You'd laugh if you saw me now, Brooks," she murmured, "yelling at kids who think the world ends when it rains." Her lips tightened. She wasn't mocking them. She envied them, their innocence, their belief that exhaustion was the worst thing that could happen. But deep down, she knew the truth. Innocence doesn't last, and her job was to make sure discipline replaced it before the world shattered it. The next day, the cadets arrived early, not out of eagerness, out of fear of being late. But beneath that fear was something new, curiosity. Sarah noticed. The whispers had changed tone, no longer mocking, more like guessing. "I heard she used to work with special ops." "No way, she's too calm." "Maybe that's why she's calm." She didn't correct them, let them wonder. Mystery was a better teacher than revelation. The morning's drill was different, tactical coordination. Moving in pairs, covering one another, simulating extraction runs. It wasn't standard academy fare. "Who taught her this?" Danner whispered. Peterson shook his head. "Who do you think?" By the third exercise, the cadets began to understand what she was building. Not soldiers, not showmen, but people who could think under pressure. When they hesitated, she was there. When they panicked, she was calm. Her voice guided without shouting. Her tone carried weight that came from somewhere deeper than instruction manuals. At one point, a cadet froze under simulated fire. Sarah appeared behind him, crouching low, voice level. "You're not frozen," she said. "You're thinking. Good. Now move." The cadet obeyed instantly, crawling forward through the mud. Later, he'd swear she'd moved like she'd done it 1,000 times before. When the drills ended, the field was chaos. Mud, laughter, exhaustion, and silence. No complaints this time. Danner, panting, turned to Peterson. You ever feel like she's not teaching us just how to fight? Peterson blinked. What else would she be teaching? I don't know, how to think maybe, how to handle it. Handle what? Danner didn't answer, because he didn't know yet. That night Sarah lingered again on the field. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soft, the air damp and heavy. She walked slowly, hands in her pockets. Each step pressed a faint mark into the mud, footprints that disappeared almost as soon as she made them. The moonlight caught the faint scar on her neck. She reached up, tracing it without thinking. A gift from a mission long buried in official silence. A reminder that survival didn't come free. She thought of Brooks again, of the promise she'd made at his grave, to lead where he couldn't. And tonight, watching these young cadets struggle, she wondered if she was keeping it. A faint sound behind her, a footstep. Ma'am. She turned. Danner stood there hesitant, holding his helmet under his arm. He looked different tonight, not cocky, not defiant, just uncertain. I wanted to apologize, he said, for yesterday, for what I said. Sarah's expression softened slightly. You learned something today. He nodded. Yeah, that I don't know half as much as I thought. She studied him for a moment, then said quietly, that's the beginning of real learning. He nodded again, unsure what to say. Then after a pause he asked, were you really in combat? For a long moment she didn't answer. Her eyes went distant, unfocused. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. I've been where silence was louder than gunfire. He didn't understand it, not fully, but something in the way she said it made him believe her. Good night, cadet, she said. Good night, ma'am. He turned and walked off. Sarah stayed, watching him disappear into the mist. The academy lights glowed faintly in the distance, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir. Hope, maybe. The faint sense that redemption wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered in the voices of those learning to respect what they once mocked. The wind picked up. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. The scent of mud, rain, and memory. Tomorrow would bring more drills, more pain, more lessons. But for tonight, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Halt stood alone on the field, calm, silent, unshaken. Because deep down she knew the truth. Respect wasn't demanded, it was earned, one drop of sweat, one scar, one lesson at a time. Why did the rumor spread so fast? By sunrise, nearly every cadet at Westbrook Military Academy had heard whispers about Lieutenant Commander Sarah Halt, the mysterious instructor who could run 12 laps without sweating, who never yelled but somehow froze an entire field with a single glance. Some said she was ex-Special Forces. Others claimed she'd seen combat in the Middle East. A few swore they saw scars on her back when she changed after drills. None of them knew the truth, but everyone wanted to. The training field was slick with dew that morning. The air held that heavy silence before a storm charged, waiting. Sarah stood at the edge of the field with her usual calm, clipboard under one arm, capped low against the wind. Her eyes scanned the cadets assembling in lines. No one was late. No one dared. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Today, she said, her voice cutting through the air, we push further. Obstacle drills, tactical coordination, and mental endurance under pressure. The cadets groaned inwardly but didn't voice it. Not after last time. Peterson leaned toward Danner as they jogged into formation. Think she'll ease up today? Danner shook his head. No chance. And he was right. The whistle shrieked. The field erupted in movement. Cadets sprinted, leapt, crawled, and climbed under Sarah's watchful eyes. Rain began halfway through the first lap, thin, cold, needling through uniforms. Mud swallowed boots, clung to hands, slowed every movement. Sarah moved among them like a shadow, steady and silent. She didn't bark orders. She corrected in quiet precision. A lifted elbow here, a misaligned foot there. Her presence itself was the correction. Danner pushed hard, his lungs burning. When Peterson slipped on the wall, Danner reached back, grabbing his arm, pulling him up. Sarah saw it. "Good," she called, voice low but approving. "Teamwork first, speed later." The cadets were changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. After 2 hours, she called a break. The group collapsed near the bleachers, panting, faces streaked with sweat and rain. Sarah stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching them recover. Danner looked up at her. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just confusion and curiosity. He wanted to ask what she'd meant yesterday. Silence louder than gunfire. The phrase had stuck with him all night. When the whistle blew again, he didn't hesitate. No arrogance this time, no smirk, just motion. By midday, the drills escalated. Weighted packs, low barriers, simulated cover fire through recorded sound. It wasn't real combat, but it was close enough to rattle nerves. "Stay low," Sarah's voice carried over the wind. "If you panic, you expose your team. If you hesitate, someone behind you pays for it." Those weren't words from a manual. Those were lived. Halfway through the crawl, Danner faltered again, not from weakness, fatigue. His chest heaved, mud plastering his face. Peterson yelled something he couldn't hear. The world narrowed into rain, mud, and heartbeat. Then out of nowhere, Sarah's voice cut through. Calm, steady, surgical. "Focus your breathing. One pull at a time, you've got this." He obeyed. He didn't even realize he was responding until he was through the barrier. When the drill ended, the cadets stood in exhausted silence. Sarah paced in front of them, mud caking her boots. Her eyes scanned the line. "You're learning," she said simply. "Slowly, but you're learning." Danner wanted to ask her something, to know how she knew so much, but he stayed silent. The question could wait. That night the academy was unusually still. The rain had stopped, replaced by fog curling through the barracks. Sarah sat alone in her small apartment, writing notes on the day's drills. Her handwriting was neat, almost surgical. Across the page, one name stood out: Danner, improving discipline. She hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. She wasn't supposed to care. Training was about systems, not stories. But she remembered the look in his eyes, the shift from arrogance to effort. It was the same shift she once made herself. Her phone buzzed, a message from Colonel Whitaker. "Briefing tomorrow, 600, bring your file." She exhaled through her nose. Of course. The next morning, Sarah stood in Whitaker's office, clean uniform, composed expression. The colonel sat behind his desk, reading from a report. "You've made quite the impression," he said finally. "Cadets talk about you nonstop." Sarah didn't react. "Good or bad, sir?" "Both," he said, almost smiling. "They respect you even if they don't admit it." He closed the folder. "But there's concern too. Some of the senior staff think you're pushing them too hard." Sarah's tone was steady. "Then I'm doing my job." Whitaker leaned back, studying her. "You've been through worse than most instructors here. I know your record, Commander, but these cadets don't. Maybe it's time they did." Her jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, they don't need my history to learn discipline." "No," Whitaker agreed. "But they need context. You're not just some trainer. They need to understand why your standards are so high." Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "When they've earned it, I'll tell them." Whitaker nodded. "Fair enough." That afternoon, the sky broke open again. The rain came down hard, thick, unrelenting. The perfect kind of misery for another field exercise. "Combat readiness drill," Sarah called out. "Crawl, climb, carry, team operations." The cadets groaned but moved. They learned not to argue. Mud splashed. The wind howled. The ground sucked at boots like it wanted to swallow them whole. When Danner slipped near the trench, Peterson reached for him, but both went down hard, face first into the muck. Laughter erupted from nearby cadets. Sarah's whistle cut it short. "You think failure's funny," she said, voice sharp. You think the ground cares if you laugh. Silence. She crouched beside the two struggling cadets. Get up, together. They did slowly, mud dripping from their sleeves. Now move, she said, together. They moved as one, awkwardly at first, then steadily. Every motion became rhythm, breath, focus. When the relay ended, Sarah stood in front of them again. That's teamwork, she said simply, not perfection, persistence. Peterson muttered under his breath, she's got a quote for everything. Sarah heard it and almost smiled. That one's not mine, she said. It was taught to me. By who, they didn't ask, but the weight in her tone made them wonder. That night the power flickered across the academy. Storm winds hammered against windows. In the dark, Danner lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His body ached, his hands blistered, but it wasn't the pain that kept him up, it was her voice. He kept replaying her words. Try carrying your teammate when you can't stop the bleeding. It didn't sound like a story she'd heard. It sounded like one she'd lived. He turned on his side, whispering to Peterson across the bunk. Hey, you really think she was special forces? Peterson groaned. Go to sleep, man. I'm serious. Yeah, I am too. It doesn't matter. Danner frowned in the dark. Maybe it does. The next morning was chaos. The field was half flooded, the mud ankle deep. But Sarah didn't cancel. She stood in the rain, whistle hanging from her neck, unmoving. The cadets assembled, already soaked. Today, she said, you'll understand what endurance really means. The whistle blew. They started crawling, climbing, sprinting, over and over. No breaks. The rain blurred their vision, water seeping into boots and collars. The wind bit at their skin. Danner's legs burned. His breath came in gasps. At one point he fell flat into the mud. A hand grabbed his arm, Peterson pulling him up. Come on. Sarah's voice carried faintly over the storm. Do not stop. You are stronger than your fear. It didn't sound like instruction. It sounded like belief. He pushed harder. By the time they finished, most could barely stand. Danner collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. Sarah walked past them, rain plastering her braid to her back. She stopped, looked down at them, and said quietly, remember this day. They would. Because none of them had ever felt so broken, and yet so alive. When the field finally emptied, Sarah remained alone. The rain softened to drizzle. She looked down at the mud, her reflection faint and distorted. She whispered something only the storm could hear. This is nothing compared to the desert. For a moment her mind slipped away, to Helmand Province, Afghanistan. A convoy ambushed. A radio screaming for backup. Her team, her family caught in the open. She remembered dragging Brooks by his vest through the dirt, bullets slicing the air. She remembered his hand slipping from hers. Her breath hitched. She closed her eyes, forcing the memory back into the dark. The field was quiet again, only the patter of rain. She exhaled. They'll understand someday, she murmured. When she finally turned to leave, the last faint light of evening reflected on the puddles at her feet, small, fractured mirrors of a soldier who had seen too much and asked for too little. Tomorrow, the lessons would continue. The cadets would wake, stretch, groan, and line up again, not knowing that the woman they doubted was once part of a unit that didn't officially exist. But they would know soon enough. And when they did, they'd never forget the day they pushed her down and realized too late who she really was. How far can a person be pushed before pride finally breaks? The question wasn't spoken aloud that morning, but it lived in every breath the cadets took. Westbrook's training field was soaked from last night's storm, puddles glinting under a steel sky, the mud dark and heavy. Boots sank with every step. It was miserable, perfect for what Lieutenant Commander Sarah Halt had planned. She stood at the edge of the field, her gray sweatshirt clinging to her shoulders, her braid damp. The whistle hung loose around her neck, a small symbol of command she rarely used. She didn't need to. Her authority was quieter, colder, and far more effective. "Cadets," she called, her voice carrying easily over the wind. "Today we test limits. You'll be working in teams. You'll crawl, climb, carry, and think all at once. You'll fail if you try to be heroes. You'll pass if you work like soldiers." No one laughed this time. They geared up in silence. Weighted packs, training rifles, helmets. Mud sucked at boots, rain threatened again. The field looked like a graveyard of pride, and that was exactly how Sarah wanted it. Danner stood beside Peterson, adjusting his strap. He didn't meet her eyes when she passed, but he felt her presence like static in the air. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something sharper, respect mixed with guilt. He'd shoved her once in frustration weeks ago. She hadn't retaliated, hadn't raised her voice. But the memory burned in him now like a brand. He couldn't forget the way she'd looked at him that day, calm, piercing, not angry, disappointed. The whistle blew. They moved. The first segment was a crawl through knee-deep mud under low wires. Rain started again halfway through, cold enough to bite. Cadets grunted, cursed, and kept crawling. Danner's arms screamed. Peterson slipped, nearly face-planting, but Danner caught him by the harness, dragging him forward. Sarah moved alongside them, her boots squelching softly. "Good. Don't wait for orders. Anticipate, work together. The enemy doesn't give second chances." Her words struck like rifle fire. By the third obstacle, exhaustion set in. The rope climb was slick, the wall unforgiving. Danner reached halfway, slipped, and slammed into the side. He landed hard in the mud, breath knocked from his chest. He looked up, gasping, and there she was. Sarah stood over him, rain streaking her face. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't move. "What are you waiting for, cadet?" she asked, voice calm, almost soft. "Permission to get back up." He blinked. "No, ma'am." "Then move." He climbed again. Slower this time, deliberate. She watched every step, every reach, until he reached the top. When he dropped down the other side, mud-covered and panting, she gave a single nod. Approval subtle but powerful enough to light something inside him. Hours later, when the drill ended, the cadets collapsed in the mud. No one spoke. Sarah walked among them, her expression unreadable. "Look around you," she said quietly. "What you see isn't weakness. It's proof you tried. Remember that when life gets worse than this, because it will." Her words lingered in the air long after she walked off the field. That night the barracks buzzed with whispers, but they weren't mocking anymore. They were curious, reverent. "Did you see her move out there? She's faster than half of us. She doesn't even breathe hard. I heard she's got a silver star." "No way, we'd know if she was combat tested." "Would we?" Danner sat silently on his bunk, listening. He wasn't sure what to believe anymore. But the image of her standing in the rain, still, unshaken, it haunted him. Later, long after lights out, he heard soft footsteps outside. Peering through the window, he saw her again, walking the field alone. She stopped near the flagpole, looking up into the storm. Rain soaked her hair. Her hands were in her pockets. She looked different, not commanding, not invincible, just human. And for a second, Danner thought he saw something like grief on her face. Inside her apartment, Sarah peeled off her wet clothes, the faint ache in her shoulders a familiar reminder of years under heavier loads. Scars mapped her back and arms, each one a silent record of somewhere, someone, something. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, not the officer, not the instructor, the survivor. Her mind drifted again, Kandahar, the alley, the scream. She remembered the sound of the explosion that took Brooks, her teammate, her brother, in arms. The heat, the ringing in her ears, the smell of burnt dust and cordite. She remembered dragging what was left of him out of the street, his voice fatting. "Sarah, lead them." She had, and she had never stopped. That night she sat at her desk, the silver star medal gleaming faintly beside her notebook. She traced its edge with one finger, her expression unreadable. "You'd hate this place," she murmured softly. "Too clean, too safe, but they need it. They need to learn before the world teaches them harder." A soft knock at the door startled her. She wasn't used to visitors. "Come in," she said quietly. Colonel Whitaker stepped inside, holding a file. "Commander." "Sir." He studied her a moment. "You're making progress." She raised an eyebrow. "They don't see it that way." "They will." He set the file down. "Tomorrow we're holding a briefing in the main auditorium. I want you there." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because they need to know who you are." Her jaw tightened. "Sir, I—" Whitaker raised a hand. "No more hiding, Commander. You've earned the right to stand in the open." She looked away, her fingers tightening around the metal. "They don't need my story to respect discipline." "No," Whitaker said softly, "but they need to understand the weight behind your silence." After he left, Sarah sat motionless for a long time. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the window. Finally she whispered, "If they must know, they'll know." The next morning, the cadets were ordered to report to the auditorium. Confused murmurs filled the hallways as boots echoed against tile. The room was massive, tiered rows facing a single stage where a projector hummed softly. Sarah stood to the side, hands clasped behind her back, calm as ever. When the last cadet sat, Colonel Whitaker stepped to the podium. His voice filled the room. "Cadets," he began, "you've been under the instruction of Lieutenant Commander Holt for several weeks now. Some of you have questioned her methods. Some of you have doubted her experience. Today, those doubts end." He turned toward her. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Holt, United States Navy SEAL Team 6, decorated combat veteran, Silver Star for valor in Afghanistan." The room went dead silent. Danner froze. Peterson's jaw dropped. A low murmur swept through the crowd, disbelief rippling like a wave. "SEAL Team 6, someone whispered. "No way." "Oh my God." Whitaker gestured to the screen. Images appeared grainy, real. Sarah in full combat gear, helmet visor cracked, sand whipping around her. Another photo, dragging an injured soldier through a ruined village. Another, her team, faces blurred for security, standing beside a helicopter under a sky of smoke. Danner's stomach turned. It wasn't a story anymore, it was truth. Sarah stepped forward to the microphone. Her voice was calm, low, steady. "I know some of you have doubts about what you can endure, about what you're capable of. I know some of you laughed at me, mocked me, even pushed me." Danner's throat went dry. Sarah's eyes swept across the room, not accusing, just honest. "You were right to doubt. Doubt is part of learning. But understand this, survival isn't built from pride or talent. It's built from discipline, humility, and trust." She paused, letting the silence breathe. "The photos you saw weren't moments of glory. They were moments of fear, of loss, of decisions I can't undo. What kept me alive wasn't strength. It was the people beside me and the respect we had for each other." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she steadied it. "I came here to teach you what that respect means before the world forces you to learn it the hard way." The room was utterly still. Every cadet, every instructor, every whisper of arrogance gone. Danner swallowed hard. His chest ached. He remembered that day in the mud when he'd shoved her. The memory burned hotter now, twisted with shame. Sarah continued, "Never underestimate someone based on what you see. Never assume you know their battles, especially the ones they fight alone." Her eyes lifted, meeting the sea of faces before her. "Out there, on the field, in the mud, I wasn't punishing you. I was preparing you. Because one day, your life or someone else's might depend on whether you quit or keep moving." She let the words hang, heavy and final. Then she stepped back from the microphone. The silence broke into applause, hesitant at first, then growing, until it filled the hall like thunder. Sarah didn't smile. She only nodded once, quietly, respectfully, as if accepting not praise but understanding. At the back of the room, Danner clapped too, slow, deliberate, his eyes burning. When the briefing ended, the cadets filed out in silence. No jokes, no laughter, just reflection. Danner lingered near the stage, hesitant. Sarah was packing up her notes when she looked up and saw him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, words failing. Finally he managed, "I didn't know." "I know," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to." "I thought," he stopped, shaking his head, "I thought you were just trying to break us." "I was," she said, "but not in the way you think. Sometimes you have to break what's weak before you can build what's strong." Danner swallowed. You were really there, Afghanistan." She nodded once. "Helmand, Kandahar, Somalia, a few other places I'd rather forget." He didn't know what to say, so he just stood there silent. Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. "You did well out there, you're learning." "Because of you," he said quietly. For a moment she allowed herself a faint smile. "Good, then maybe this place is working after all." She turned to leave, her boots echoing softly across the wooden stage. Danner watched her go, realization heavy in his chest. The woman he'd mocked, doubted, and disrespected had lived a life he couldn't begin to imagine, and she'd carried it all with silence, patience, and grace. And that, he realized, was real strength. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world was clean again. But for Danner, nothing looked the same. What happens when respect replaces doubt? The air at Westbrook felt different after that day in the auditorium. No one whispered anymore. No one joked when she passed. The same cadets who once smirked now stood a little straighter, moved a little faster, and listened a little harder. Something invisible had shifted, not fear, not awe, but reverence. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Holt had earned their silence. Now she was earning their trust. That morning, fog curled low over the training field. The sun hadn't yet broken through, and the world was caught between night and day, gray, suspended, breathless. Sarah stood at the center of it, clipboard under her arm, watching the cadets assemble. "Morning," she said quietly. A dozen voices answered, crisp and unified. "Morning, ma'am." It was the first time they'd ever spoken to her in full chorus. She noticed. She didn't comment, but a faint flicker of warmth passed behind her eyes. "Today we start phase 2, she said. "Tactical coordination and endurance, but this time you'll lead." Confused looks rippled through the group. Sarah pointed toward Danner. "You take Alpha Team." "Ma'am." "You heard me." He straightened. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Peterson. "You take Bravo, same objectives, you'll coordinate, I'll observe." They exchanged nervous glances. Leading wasn't what they expected. They were used to following, to reacting. Sarah took a step closer. "You've learned how to endure. Now you'll learn how to think under pressure. Combat isn't chaos if you trust your training." The whistle blew. The drill began at dawn. The field had been transformed overnight. Ropes, trenches, barriers, and simulated casualty dummies scattered across the mud. Each team had to extract, transport, and defend while completing objectives under time constraints. Sarah didn't shout orders. She moved among them, silent and watchful. The only sound was the thud of boots and the clipped shouts of coordination. "Cover left," Danner yelled. "Move the dummy," Peterson barked. They stumbled, adjusted, improved. Slowly the chaos turned into rhythm, rough but real. Sarah's voice cut in occasionally, calm and precise. "Danner, trust your flank." "Peterson, don't micromanage. Lead, don't hover." They adapted quickly. The lessons she drilled into them, timing, breathing, control, came alive. After 2 hours, both teams collapsed near the bleachers, soaked in sweat and mud. Sarah stood over them, arms crossed. "That," she said quietly, "is leadership in its rawest form, ugly, loud, and necessary." She paused, eyes scanning the faces before her. When you lead, you carry more than orders. You carry responsibility. People follow you into places they might not leave. Remember that before you open your mouth next time. The cadets nodded. No one argued. Danner wiped the mud from his face. "Ma'am," he said suddenly, "when you were deployed, how did you know what to do when everything went wrong?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, then said softly, "You don't know, you just move. You make choices you hope you can live with. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't." The field went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. "All right," she said finally, turning away. 10-minute break, then again. During the break, Danner sat quietly with Peterson. The old arrogance was gone. His voice was lower now, thoughtful. "She doesn't talk about it much, does she?" Peterson shook his head. "Would you, after what she's seen?" Danner stared at the field, where Sarah stood alone, watching the horizon. "No," he said quietly, "I guess I wouldn't." That night, long after lights out, Sarah sat at her desk again. The metal glimmered faintly beside a half-empty mug of coffee. She opened a small notebook, not military reports this time, but her own handwriting. Each page was filled with notes on cadets, their strengths, weaknesses, small progressions. Danner's name appeared again. Pride turned to purpose. Watch him closely. She exhaled slowly. The silence of the room pressed against her ears, too familiar. Too much like the silence that used to follow firefights, when everyone counted breaths to make sure they were still alive. Her eyes drifted to a photograph pinned on the wall, her old team. Faces half smiling, dusty, tired. One face missing. "Brooks," she murmured, "you'd like these kids." For the first time in weeks, she smiled, faint, fleeting. Then she closed the notebook and leaned back, letting the hum of the night replace the ghosts in her head. The next morning she pushed harder. The drills turned tactical, simulated rescues, hostage extractions, field medics under pressure. She wanted chaos, controlled chaos, the kind that forced instinct to surface. "Time doesn't wait for hesitation," she told them. "You'll freeze once, maybe twice, before you realize hesitation kills faster than bullets." The cadets absorbed every word. The difference between then and now was night and day. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were internalizing them. Halfway through the day, a siren blared, a new element she'd added without warning. The sound ripped through the air, jarring and sharp. The cadets spun, confused. "Scenario change," Sarah shouted. "If that compromised, you adapt." Panic rippled, brief but real. Then Danner stepped forward. "Alpha team, left flank, Peterson, cover the rear." The rest followed instantly. For the first time, Sarah didn't intervene. She watched, listened. The cadence of their voices sounded like a real unit now, unified under pressure. When the exercise ended, they were filthy, drenched but grinning. Peterson dropped his helmet, laughing breathlessly. "We didn't screw it up this time." Danner smirked. "Don't jinx it." Sarah approached, arms crossed. "Better," she said. "Still slow, but better." Danner looked at her. "Admit it, ma'am, we did okay." She tilted her head, almost smiling. "For cadets who once thought running 10 laps was torture, you did more than okay." Laughter broke out, genuine this time. The sound was strange but welcome. Sarah turned away so they wouldn't see the small curve of pride that tugged at her lips. That evening, Colonel Whitaker caught up with her outside the training field. The sun was setting, bleeding orange across the mud. "You've changed them," he said quietly. "They changed themselves," Sarah replied. "I just pushed." He studied her. "And you look different too." She shrugged. "They remind me of who I used to be before I stopped believing in second chances." Whitaker smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why you're here." She didn't answer. The wind carried the faint echo of laughter from the cadets still cleaning up nearby. For the first time in a long while, it didn't hurt to hear it. The next week, training intensified again. Obstacle endurance mixed with mental puzzles, scenarios built to test stress, not strength. Sarah set up a simulation with smoke, noise, and timed objectives. The cadets had to navigate blind through fog to locate wounded teammates. The whistle blew, smoke hissed across the field, shouts filled the air. "Where Peterson?" someone yelled. "Left side." "No, right." Chaos erupted, just how she planned it. She moved among them unseen, listening. Panic, disorientation, it was natural. The trick was to turn it into focus. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise. "Calm down," Danner shouted. "Listen for voices one at a time." The team followed his lead, regrouping quickly. They moved methodically, locating the injured and carrying them to safety. When the smoke cleared, Sarah blew the final whistle. "Not perfect," she said, "but you adapted. That's the difference between amateurs and survivors." Danner grinned through mud and sweat. "Starting to sound like you actually approve, ma'am." Sarah's tone softened. "I do, but approval fades, discipline stays." Later that night, the cadets gathered quietly in the mess hall, replaying the day. The old rivalry between Alpha and Bravo had turned into camaraderie. Even Peterson, once the loudest complainer, was talking about how the commander actually cares. They didn't know she was listening from the doorway unseen. She stayed just long enough to hear Danner say, "You know, I used to think she was just trying to break us, but maybe she was trying to build something we couldn't see yet." Sarah turned away, her throat tightening. She didn't need thanks, just proof the lessons were taking root. Outside, the night air was crisp. She walked toward the field, her boots crunching softly against gravel. The moonlight caught the edge of her medal again, tucked in her pocket now, never worn. She paused at the flagpole, looking up. The stars were faint but steady. Her voice barely a whisper. "You were right, Brooks, they're learning." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. By the end of that week, something remarkable had happened. The cadets weren't the same group that had mocked her months ago. They moved like a unit now, breathing, thinking, and reacting as one. And Sarah, she'd changed too. The haunted stillness that used to fill her eyes had softened. Teaching had become more than duty, it was redemption. She stood at the edge of the field after another long day, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air smelled of sweat, mud, and pride. Danner approached quietly, stopping beside her. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "Miss what?" "The field, the real one." She was silent for a long time before answering. "Every day," she said, "but I don't miss what it took." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he could say. Sarah looked at him. "You'll make a good leader someday, cadet. Just remember, leadership isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the calmest when everyone else breaks." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." They stood there a while, watching the sky burn itself out. When Danner finally walked off, Sarah stayed behind. The wind tugged at her braid. Her reflection shimmered faintly in a puddle near her boots, older, steadier, freer. And for the first time in years she smiled. Not the tight, controlled kind, a real one. Because somewhere between the drills, the mud, and the silence, she'd found something she thought she'd lost long ago. Purpose. Why did the colonel call her in so early? The message had come before dawn. "Command office, 500, confidential." The hallway was still empty when Sarah Halt arrived, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. She knocked once and entered. Colonel Whitaker looked up from his desk, the glow of a single lamp washing his lined face in amber. "Close the door, Commander." She did. He gestured for her to sit. "You've done well with the cadets," he began. "Better than any instructor I've seen here. You turned arrogance into teamwork." Sarah nodded once. "They're getting there." "That's exactly why I'm calling you in. They're ready for something bigger." She frowned slightly. "Bigger?" Whitaker leaned back, interlacing his fingers. "Operation Crosswind, the final simulation." Sarah's gaze sharpened. She'd heard whispers about it, the Academy's most intense test, a multi-day, full-environment field exercise. Sleep deprivation, simulated attacks, strategy, and survival. Most cadets never forgot it. "Sir, they're still green," she said quietly, "barely past basic cohesion." "And that's why it has to be you leading them," Whitaker said. "They'll follow you anywhere. I want you to oversee the exercise personally. You'll brief them at 600 tomorrow." Sarah hesitated. "It's not just a test, sir, it's psychological." "I know," he said softly. "That's why they need you." She looked down at her hands, fingers scarred and still. "They'll hate me for what I'll have to do." Whitaker's voice gentled. "They'll thank you later. You, of all people, understand that." The next morning, the air was cold enough to sting. The cadets stood on the field in full combat training gear, faces pale with curiosity and nerves. Sarah stood before them, her tone clipped, serious. "You've spent weeks learning to move, to think, to survive," she said. "Now you'll prove it. Operation Crosswind begins at 0600 tomorrow. 3 days. No communication, no rest cycles beyond what you earn, no guidance." Peterson frowned. "What kind of operation, ma'am?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "You'll find out in the field." Murmurs rippled through the group. Danner shifted uneasily. Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't a game. You'll make mistakes. You'll argue. You'll want to quit. And that's the point. I want to see what happens when your comfort dies." The silence that followed was thick. Then she added, softer, "The only thing that matters out there is how you treat each other when things go wrong." They deployed the next morning before dawn. The buses rumbled through misty backroads until the forest swallowed them whole, tall pines, fog curling around trunks like breath. The camp was remote, stripped of luxury. Tents, ration packs, no power. Sarah stood by the map board as the teams gathered. Her calm presence anchored the chaos. "Alpha Team, you'll move north. Bravo, east. Both groups will rendezvous at Checkpoint Delta by nightfall. You'll navigate by compass, not GPS. Communication limited to your unit radios. You get lost, you adapt." Peterson blinked. "What if we don't make the checkpoint?" "Then you sleep in the dirt and learn why preparation matters," she said. Danner adjusted his pack, muttering under his breath, "Here we go again." Sarah heard it and almost smiled. "Dismissed," she said. The forest swallowed them quickly. Hours passed, mud, hills, cold air slicing through fatigues. The weight of their gear dug into shoulders and hands blistered against rifle grips. By noon, Danner's group hit a ridge, compass in hand, trying to find a trail marker half hidden in brush. Peterson's group was still miles east, wading through creeks that numbed their legs. Sarah followed at a distance, watching both teams through binoculars. She didn't intervene. Not yet. Every mistake now was a lesson that would sink deeper than any speech. By evening, Alpha Team stumbled into a clearing. The light was dying fast and their map was smeared with rain. Danner checked his compass again, frustration simmering. "Are we even going the right way?" Peterson snapped over radio. "West by northwest," Danner replied. "I think." "You think?" "Maps don't read themselves." Sarah's voice crackled faintly through their channels. "Cadets, listen. If you're lost, admit it. Pride won't find the way, awareness will." Her tone was calm, steady, but it hit them harder than any reprimand. They stopped, breathed, reoriented. By nightfall, both teams made camp short of their target. Cold, wet, exhausted, but intact. Sarah arrived an hour later, quiet as shadow. She moved among the tents, checking formations, observing without judgment. When she stopped at Danner, he looked up from his small campfire, eyes weary but alert. "Thought we failed," he said. "You did," she replied, "but you didn't give up. That's the part that matters." He chuckled weakly. "You ever fail, ma'am?" Sarah met his eyes. "Every mission has failure somewhere in it. The trick is deciding whether it defines you or refines you." The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the faint scars, the calm that only came from surviving chaos. "Get some rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow will hurt." It did. Day 2 began before sunrise, and within an hour the exercise turned brutal. Terrain navigation merged with timed rescue operations, simulated wounded dummies, limited supplies, increasing fatigue. By noon, tempers flared. Peterson's team argued over directions. Danner struggled with carrying stretchers uphill. Sarah watched from a ridge, recording notes. She could see cracks forming, small, human, inevitable. When Danner's team finally reached a river crossing, their radio crackled with static. "Bravo team, under attack." The cadets froze. It was part of the simulation, but the panic sounded too real. Sarah's voice broke through. "Maintain discipline, no heroics. Assess, plan, act." But they didn't wait. Adrenaline took over. Danner grabbed his pack. "We're going." They charged east through the trees. Branches whipped their faces. The sound of simulated fire grew louder, bursts from paint rounds echoing like real gunfire. When they reached the clearing, Peterson's group was pinned behind a log barrier. Colored smoke curled in the air. "Cover left," Danner shouted, dropping beside them. They moved together, fast, efficient. Training took over: low stances, controlled bursts, coordinated movements. It was chaos turned rhythm. And then it was over. The enemy, instructors in camo, called end of simulation. The cadets dropped their rifles, panting. Sarah appeared through the haze like a ghost. She was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "You broke protocol," she said evenly. "But you didn't break formation. That's progress." Danner looked up, breathless. "We couldn't just sit there." She nodded once. "That's the fine line between instinct and recklessness. Learn where it lies." No punishment, just truth. That night the forest was quiet again. Campfires glowed faintly like scattered stars. The cadets sat in circles, eating ration packs, their faces tired but proud. Peterson laughed suddenly. "Remember when we couldn't finish one crawl without complaining?" Danner smirked. "Yeah, now look at us. Mud's practically home." Even Sarah, sitting nearby, allowed herself a small grin. "Don't get too comfortable," she said. "Tomorrow's extraction drill starts before dawn." Groans echoed through the camp, half joking, half dreadful. When the laughter faded, she looked out over the forest, quiet again. The way the firelight flickered reminded her of another camp, years ago, somewhere far hotter, far louder. She saw her old team again in the faces of these cadets. The same youth, same hunger, same fragility. Brooks's voice returned in memory. "Lead them right, Sarah, not like we were led." She whispered into the dark, "I'm trying." The final day broke cold and silent. Fog blanketed the forest, making every sound echo twice. The cadets moved out before sunrise, packs heavier, bodies aching but hearts steady. This time Sarah joined them. No observation, participation. She wanted them to see her not as the unshakable instructor, but as part of the fight. The final objective: reach extraction point through 3 simulated ambushes, carrying a casualty the entire way. It was brutal. Halfway through the first ridge, they hit mock enemy fire. Paint rounds cracked against trees. Mud exploded around them. "Down," Sarah shouted, dropping beside Danner. "Move low, cover fire, 2-second bursts." Her commands were crisp, surgical. Even under simulation, her instincts switched, soldier mode, pure and clean. The cadets followed, no hesitation. When they reached cover, she looked back. Peterson's status. He yelled, "We're down 1, simulated casualty." "Then he's your mission now," she said. They lifted the dummy together, trudging uphill, rain slicking their helmets. Every breath was pain. Every movement was choice. Hours later, they reached the extraction point, drenched, bleeding from scrapes, shaking from exhaustion. The whistle blew one final time. Sarah stood there, silent. Then she spoke. "You made it." No applause, no celebration, just truth. She walked closer, voice quiet but firm. Remember how this feels, not the pain, the unity. You fought through confusion, fatigue, and fear, and you didn't quit. That's what leadership means. That's what life outside this academy demands. Her voice softened. You were never training for me, you were training for each other. The forest was utterly still. Peterson's voice broke first, hoarse. Ma'am, why do you still do this, after everything you've already survived? Sarah looked at him, eyes calm but full. Because someone once believed I could be more than what the world saw, and now it's my turn. No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. The message sank deeper than words could carry. That evening, back at the academy, the cadets stood in formation as the sun bled out over the horizon. The field glowed gold, the air sharp and clean. Sarah walked past them slowly, her boots leaving faint prints in the dirt. They weren't recruits anymore. They were soldiers in spirit, shaped by mud, rain, and truth. She stopped in front of Danner, studying him quietly. He saluted, "Ma'am." She returned it, "Well done, cadet." He hesitated, permission to speak freely. "Granted." He swallowed, "You changed us, all of us, thank you." For the first time in a long time, Sarah let the silence stretch, not awkward but peaceful. "Don't thank me," she said softly. "Earn it every day." Then she turned toward the flag, eyes lifted. The sun dipped lower, and for a moment she looked not like an instructor, not even a soldier, but something rarer. A survivor teaching others how to live. The wind stirred her hair. The cadets stood at attention. And as the light faded, a single thought crossed every mind on that field, unspoken but shared. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks quietly among you, carrying scars you'll never see. Why did the silence feel so heavy after victory? The operation had ended. The field was empty now, no shouting, no whistles, no pounding boots. Just the sound of the flag snapping in the wind, and the echo of effort still clinging to the ground like ghosts that refused to leave. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Halt stood alone at the edge of the training field, hands clasped behind her back. The cadets had gone, showered, slept. They'd earned it, but she stayed. The air smelled of mud and rain, the sky washed clean after days of storms. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet. It wasn't peace, not quite, but it was something close. For weeks she had pushed them, broken them, rebuilt them. Now they were soldiers in spirit, though still cadets in rank. But Sarah, she wasn't sure what she was anymore. A leader, a ghost, or just someone trying to make sense of a life she'd barely survived. The next morning, Colonel Whitaker called her to his office again. He didn't speak for a while, just looked at her with that knowing calm of a man who'd seen decades of broken soldiers put themselves back together. Finally he said, "You did it." Sarah stayed silent. They passed with the highest collective performance score in Academy history. You turned a group of egos into a team. She gave a faint shrug. They did the work. Whitaker leaned forward, and you showed them how. He closed the folder in front of him, studying her for a long moment. "You're not planning to leave, are you?" Her eyes flicked up. "I haven't decided." "Sarah," he said softly, "you built something here. You found purpose again." Her tone was gentle but tired. "Purpose doesn't erase ghosts, Colonel." Whitaker leaned back, sighing. "No, it doesn't, but it gives them somewhere to rest." That struck deeper than she expected. Later that day, Sarah returned to the field. The cadets were already there, running drills on their own, laughing between laps, shouting encouragements. She watched from a distance, unseen. Something about it made her chest ache, not pain, but something warmer. Pride, maybe, or the fragile start of hope. Danner saw her first. "Ma'am," he shouted, snapping to attention. The rest followed instantly, straightening into formation. Sarah approached, boots crunching softly against the gravel. "You're early," she said. Peterson grinned. Guess we're starting to like the pain. Or fear being late, Danner added. Laughter rippled through the line. She let it live a moment before saying, pain's just proof you're still here. The question is what you do with it. Then she added, quieter, let's see what you've learned. The session that followed wasn't an exercise. It was a celebration in disguise. Obstacle drills, coordination runs, team extractions. Every move was fluid, every call clear. The clumsy chaos that once defined them was gone. Sarah moved among them, not as an overseer now, but as part of the rhythm, correcting softly, encouraging when needed, smiling once or twice when she thought no one noticed. By the end, as the cadets gathered in a half-circle, Danner spoke without being asked. "Ma'am," he said, breathless, "I used to think training was about toughness, about proving we're strong." Sarah tilted her head, and now? He wiped the sweat from his face, smiling faintly. "Now I think it's about remembering what we stand for, even when no one's watching." Her eyes met his. "Then you've learned the right lesson." For a moment the world felt still again. The wind, the light, the dust hanging in the air, everything slowed into one perfect breath of quiet understanding. That evening the cadets gathered outside the barracks. No one told them to. They just did. Someone had lit a small campfire in the dirt, and they sat around it, uniforms unbuttoned, boots muddy, laughter low. For the first time they weren't talking about drills or ranks. They were talking about her. Peterson tossed a pebble into the flames. "You think she'll ever tell us more about what really happened over there?" Danner shook his head. "She already did, just not in words." "What do you mean?" "She doesn't need to tell us stories," he said quietly. "We've seen it. Every scar, every lesson, that is the story." The others nodded slowly. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was understanding. Inside her quarters, Sarah sat alone, a cup of coffee cooling beside her. The medal still rested on her desk, but she hadn't touched it in days. Instead, she stared at a single letter, half-written. "To the families of my former team." Her handwriting faltered after that. What could she possibly say? That she still saw them in every flash of light, every echo of gunfire that memory refused to let go. She exhaled softly, setting the pen down. The quiet pressed close. Then a knock. "Come in," she said. Danner stepped inside, hesitant. "Ma'am, I hope I'm not intruding." "You are," she said flatly, then smirked. "But sit anyway." He smiled faintly, pulling up a chair. "We wanted to thank you, the guys. We know what you've done for us." Sarah looked at him for a moment, then said, "You don't owe me thanks." "I think we do." He hesitated, then asked softly, "Does it ever get easier, the memories?" Her expression changed, subtle but deep. She looked down at her hands before answering. "No, but they get quieter when you start living again." Danner nodded slowly. "You think we'll ever be ready, out there, I mean?" She looked at him. "No one's ever ready. You just learn how to move anyway." He smiled. "Sounds like something you'd say on the field." She raised an eyebrow. "That's because it's true." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. When Danner finally stood to leave, she stopped him. "Danner." He turned. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't forget what you learned here. Not the drills, the discipline. The way you stood back up when no one believed in you. That's the part that'll save you someday." He swallowed hard. "I won't forget." Then he was gone. Sarah sat back, eyes distant. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel empty. Weeks passed. Training cycles changed. New cadets arrived, loud, clumsy, overconfident, just like the last ones. But the veterans, Danner, Peterson, and their class were different now. They led quietly, corrected calmly. They carried Sarah's lessons like invisible armor. One afternoon, she watched from afar as Danner corrected a new recruit's stance. "Not like that," he said. "You don't fight the ground, you work with it." Sarah almost laughed. Her own words echoed back through him. Whitaker appeared beside her. "They sound like you," he said. "They sound like soldiers," she replied. He nodded. "You're staying on next term then?" She hesitated. "I think so." He smiled faintly. "Good, you're exactly what this place needs." She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. That night Sarah walked the field one last time before lights out. The sky was wide and dark, stars scattered like quiet witnesses. The air was cool, the ground soft under her boots. She stopped near the same flagpole she'd stood under weeks ago, the one where she'd once felt the weight of every ghost. Now it felt different. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the medal. The silver star gleamed faintly under the moonlight, a relic of a past life. She turned it over in her hand, tracing its edges, remembering every drop of sweat and pain it represented. Then, with a soft exhale, she knelt and pressed it gently into the dirt at the base of the flagpole. "Time to let you rest," she whispered. She stood, brushing her palms together, her eyes lifting toward the sky. The wind tugged at her hair, cool and clean. For the first time in years, she felt light. The next morning the cadets found her already on the field, arms crossed, face calm as always. "Morning," she said. They saluted, voices steady. "Morning, ma'am." She studied them for a moment, then said quietly, "You know, the hardest part about becoming a soldier isn't learning how to fight. It's learning how to stay human while you do it." They listened, no smirks, no glances, just stillness. She continued, "You've learned to lead, to endure, to respect. But the real test comes when no one's watching, when it's just you and the weight of your choices. That's where honor lives." A pause. The wind carried her words across the field like a prayer. Dismissed. The cadets moved out, their boots thudding in rhythm. Sarah watched them go, the future walking away, carrying pieces of her with them. She turned back to the flagpole, eyes catching the faint glint of metal half buried in the dirt. The metal gleamed once in the sunlight, then vanished under shadow. She smiled. Sometimes dignity doesn't need to speak. It simply acts. And that, she realized, was enough. How does someone who's lived her whole life in motion finally learn to stand still? Weeks had passed since the end of Operation Crosswind. The academy had settled into its usual rhythm, boots at dawn, whistles, the hum of morning orders, but something in the air had changed. Discipline no longer came from fear, it came from respect. Everywhere Sarah Halt walked, cadets straightened instinctively, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. She never mentioned her past again. She didn't need to. It lived in every scar on her hands, every pause in her speech, every lesson she left behind. The season was turning. The air carried the faint warmth of spring, the sharp smell of thawing earth. New recruits had arrived, wide-eyed, loud, and blissfully ignorant of what waited for them on that field. And the veterans, Danner, Peterson, the others, stood in front of them now, ready to lead. The first morning of the new term, Sarah watched from the sidelines as Danner barked orders. His voice was firm, his posture controlled. Not the cocky swagger of months ago, but the calm authority of someone who'd learned the price of pride. "Again," he shouted as recruits stumbled over the rope line. "Stay low, breathe, and move." Peterson jogged beside him, correcting stances, offering hands to those who fell. Their rhythm mirrored hers so precisely that it almost hurt to watch. Whitaker approached from behind, hands clasped behind his back. "They sound like you," he said. Sarah smirked faintly. "They sound better." "Maybe," he said, "but they learned from the best." She didn't answer. She just watched Danner haul a recruit out of the mud, shouting encouragement instead of insults. Growth. That was the real mission all along. Later that day, she sat alone in her office, sunlight spilling across her desk. The medal was gone, buried at the base of the flagpole, but its absence felt right. In its place lay a small envelope. Her resignation letter. She'd written it weeks ago after Crosswind, never sent it, but today felt different. Whitaker had hinted about a position in Washington, advanced training, policy development, a desk, air-conditioned halls, quiet days. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt nothing but an ache deep in her chest. She folded the letter again and slipped it into a drawer. Not today, maybe not ever. Evening crept across the field like a slow tide. Sarah walked its edge, her boots tracing the same worn path she'd followed since the first day she'd arrived. The grass was greener now, the air softer, the world gentler if only for a while. She stopped near the flagpole. The medal she'd buried was gone, probably found by rain or time, but a small patch of wild grass had grown where it once lay. It made her smile. Footsteps behind her broke the silence. "Ma'am." She turned. Danner stood there, uniform half unbuttoned, holding a small folder. "Colonel said you might still be out here," he said. "We're heading out tomorrow, deployment training in Virginia." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're ready." He exhaled, smiling nervously. "I hope so." "You are," she said simply. "You just don't know it yet." He hesitated, then handed her the folder. "It's from all of us, something to remember us by." Inside was a photograph, grainy, printed from the academy camera. The cadets, covered in mud, lined shoulder to shoulder. Her in the center, not smiling exactly, but alive. On the back, in Danner's handwriting, "For the one who taught us how to stand when the world pushes us down." Her throat tightened. She blinked once, steadying herself. "You shouldn't have." "We owed you," he said quietly. "You changed everything." She looked up at him. "No, cadet, you changed yourselves. I just gave you the mirror." Danner smiled faintly. "Still, thank you." He turned to leave, but she called out, "Danner." He paused. "Out there," she said softly, "don't chase glory, chase purpose. It lasts longer." He nodded once, eyes steady. "Yes, ma'am." Then he was gone. His footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only wind and silence. That night Sarah didn't sleep. She walked the academy grounds, moving through the barracks, the obstacle course, the range, each space carrying echoes of laughter, shouting, struggle. Her ghosts had changed shape. They weren't soldiers lost to war anymore. They were memories of cadets finding strength. She stopped near the training pit where she'd first made them crawl through mud under rain. The same place where Danner had once shouted that she didn't understand their pain. She knelt, pressing her hand into the soil. It was firm, cool, alive. "You were right," she whispered to the ground. "It wasn't about breaking them. It was about building them." In the distance, the lights of the dorm flickered out one by one. She looked up, the night sky wide above her. Stars scattered like pinpricks, tiny, stubborn lights refusing to die. She exhaled slowly. "Guess I'm not done yet." The following week brought ceremony. Graduation. The parade field gleamed beneath a clear sky. Rows of cadets stood in perfect alignment, uniforms pressed, faces solemn. Families filled the stands, waving flags, snapping photos. Sarah stood beside Colonel Whitaker on the stage, her expression calm but her heart heavy with pride. She watched these cadets stumble through mud and rain. Now they looked like soldiers ready to carry the world. When Danner's name was called, the crowd erupted. He stepped forward, saluted sharply, received his certificate, and turned to face her. Their eyes met just for a heartbeat, a silent exchange, gratitude, respect, understanding. She returned his salute. That single motion held every word neither of them could say aloud. When the ceremony ended, the cadets tossed their caps, laughter rising into the warm air. Sarah didn't join the celebration. She slipped quietly from the stage, walking back toward the empty field. Later, when the sun began to set, Whitaker found her sitting on the bleachers, staring at the horizon. "You did good work," he said, taking a seat beside her. She nodded. "They'll be fine." "You sound surprised." "Just hopeful," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. What about you, Commander? You ever going to let yourself rest? She smiled faintly. Maybe someday. He chuckled. You deserve it. She looked out over the field. Rest isn't what I want, just meaning. Whitaker nodded. Then you've already got it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peace, the rare kind that comes when purpose finally outruns pain. That night the academy was quiet again. The moon hung low, silvering the flagpole and the faint trails of boot prints left behind. Sarah walked slowly across the field one last time. Every step felt like both a memory and a promise. She stopped at the far end, where the grass gave way to dirt, and turned back toward the main building. Lights glowed softly in the windows. Somewhere inside, new cadets were laughing, unaware of the stories written into this ground. She smiled. She thought about her team again, the ones who never came home. Brooks, Hale, Torres, names etched in her memory like scars on her skin. For years she'd carried their ghosts like weights. Tonight they felt lighter, almost at ease. "Still with me," she whispered. The wind picked up soft, almost answering. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Before dawn, she stood in the doorway of her quarters, bag packed, uniform neat. She wasn't leaving the academy forever, just stepping back, taking a few weeks of leave. A pause between battles. She glanced once more at the photo on her desk. The muddy, exhausted faces of her cadets, herself in the middle, caught mid-smile. Beneath it lay a single note written in her handwriting. Strength isn't in what we survive. It's in what we give back after surviving. She folded the note, slipped it into her pocket, and turned off the light. As she walked through the empty hallway, the first light of morning spilled through the windows, painting gold across the floor. The academy flag rose outside, catching the wind. Sarah stopped, saluted, and whispered, "For all of them." Then she walked away, steady, quiet, free. Somewhere months later, a letter arrived at the academy. No return address, just a simple note inside, written in the same tight, clean handwriting. To the next class of cadets. You won't understand at first why the mud matters, why the pain matters, or why silence is part of training. You'll hate it. You'll curse it. And then, one day, you'll realize it made you someone you didn't know you could be. When that happens, look at the person beside you and thank them. Because none of us make it alone. S.H. The letter was pinned to the bulletin board outside the mess hall, where generations of recruits would read it long after she was gone. Some would smile, some would scoff, but all of them at some point would learn exactly what she meant. Because at Westbrook, her name had become more than a title. It was a reminder that sometimes the strongest warriors aren't the ones who shout the loudest. They're the ones who teach others to listen. And years later, when a young recruit somewhere in a faraway desert would whisper her name during a moment of doubt, the lesson would live again. Not as legend, but as truth. Because dignity, Sarah Holt had taught them, doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't boast. It simply acts, quietly, completely, and without needing to be seen. And that was her final legacy.